The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, disrupting the usual quiet of Maple Street in Portland, Oregon. Emma Chen watched from her living room window as furniture was carried into apartment 4B, the unit that had sat empty for 3 months since Mrs. Kowalski moved to Arizona to be closer to her daughter. Emma had lived alone in 4A for 2 years now, ever since the divorce. The apartment had become her sanctuary, a place where she could rebuild herself piece by piece. She'd changed her name back to Chen, left her marketing job at the firm where she'd met David, and started freelancing from home. Her life had become smaller, quieter, safer. The new neighbor appeared around noon, directing the movers with efficient gestures. He was tall, dark-haired, probably in his mid-30s. Even from her window, Emma could see he moved with a certain carefulness, like someone aware of the space he occupied. She pulled away from the window before he could notice her watching. That evening there was a knock on her door. Emma hesitated, her hand on the deadbolt. She rarely had visitors anymore. "Hi." The man from 4B stood in the hallway, holding a bottle of wine. Up close she could see warm brown eyes and a slightly crooked smile. "I'm your new neighbor, James Mitchell. Thought I'd introduce myself the old-fashioned way." Emma found herself smiling despite her usual wariness. "Emma Chen. Welcome to the building." "Thanks, I'm still drowning in boxes, but I wanted to at least meet the neighbors before I become a total hermit." He offered the wine. "Peace offering for any noise I might make getting settled." She accepted the bottle, their fingers briefly touching. "I'm pretty sure I won't even notice. These old buildings have surprisingly thick walls." "Good to know." James glanced back at his open door. "Well, I should probably get back to unpacking. But maybe we could grab coffee sometime. I'm new to Portland, and I could use some recommendations on where the good places are." "Sure," Emma heard herself say, surprising herself. "There's a great cafe 2 blocks down. Morning brew." "Perfect. How about Saturday, 10-ish?" "Okay." After he left, Emma stood in her doorway for a long moment, the wine bottle cool in her hands. When was the last time she'd agreed to meet someone for coffee? When was the last time she'd wanted to? Saturday arrived with unexpected sunshine. Emma changed her outfit 3 times before settling on jeans and a simple blue sweater. Casual, but not too casual. She told herself it wasn't a date, just neighbors being friendly. James was already at morning brew when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees and an assortment of pastries. He stood when he saw her, that crooked smile appearing again. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I got a variety," he said, gesturing at the pastries. "The barista said the lemon scone is incredible." "You didn't have to do all this." But Emma was touched. "I wanted to." He pulled out her chair. "Tell me about Portland. What do you love about it?" They talked for 2 hours. Emma found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years, telling James about the bookstores she haunted, the hiking trails she'd discovered, the food carts downtown. He listened with genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, shared his own stories about growing up in Boston and working in security consulting, he said, a slight pause before the words. "Corporate stuff, mostly. Pretty boring, actually." "Can't be that boring if it brought you all the way to Portland." "New client, new start. Sometimes you need to shake things up, you know." Emma knew exactly what he meant. They'd both come to Portland looking for something different, something better. As autumn deepened into winter, their coffee meetings became a regular thing. Saturdays at 10, then Wednesdays for lunch, then spontaneous knocks on each other's doors just to share something funny or ask if the other needed anything from the store. Emma felt the walls she'd built around herself beginning to lower, brick by careful brick. James was easy to be with. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. When she mentioned briefly that she was divorced, he simply nodded and said, "I'm sorry you went through that," without prying for details. When she caught herself laughing too loudly at one of his stories and suddenly went quiet, he just smiled gently and changed the subject. But there were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible, when Emma caught something in James's expression, a shadow crossing his face when she mentioned her past, a tension in his shoulders when she talked about why she'd left her old job. Once, she'd found him standing in the hallway staring at her door with an expression she couldn't quite read, almost pained. "Everything okay?" she'd asked. He'd startled, then smiled. "Yeah, just tired. Long day of work calls." It was a Friday night in December when everything shifted. They'd fallen into the habit of movie nights, alternating between their apartments. This time it was Emma's turn to host. She'd made popcorn and opened the wine James had brought that first day. She'd been saving it for a special occasion, though she couldn't quite articulate what made tonight special. They were watching an old romantic comedy, something light and easy, but Emma found herself more aware of James sitting beside her on the couch than of anything happening on screen. The space between them felt charged, electric. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could hear each breath he took. When she reached for her wineglass at the same moment James did, their hands collided. They both laughed nervously, but neither pulled away. His fingers brushed against hers, tentative, questioning. Emma turned to look at him. In the flickering light from the TV, his eyes were almost black. "James!" "Emma, I need to tell you something." His voice was rough, urgent, but before he could continue, Emma leaned forward and kissed him. The world contracted to that single point of contact, his lips against hers, soft and warm, and tasting of wine. For a moment, James froze. Then he was kissing her back, his hand coming up to cup her face with such tenderness that Emma felt something crack open inside her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "Emma, wait. I really need to tell you—" "Later," she whispered. "Tell me later. Right now, just stay." He stayed. Emma woke the next morning to winter sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and James's arm draped across her waist. She lay still, savoring the moment. The warmth of his body against her back, the gentle rhythm of his breathing, the feeling of being held. It had been so long since she'd felt safe enough to let someone this close. She felt James stir behind her, his arm tightening briefly before he pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Good morning," he murmured against her skin. "Good morning." She turned in his arms to face him. In the daylight, she could see traces of worry around his eyes. "You okay?" "I'm perfect, you're perfect. This is—" He trailed off, his thumb tracing circles on her hip. "Emma, last night, I tried to tell you something." A flutter of anxiety disturbed Emma's contentment. "Is it bad?" "It's complicated." James sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "And I should have told you weeks ago. I've been trying to find the right time, the right words, but—" Emma's phone rang, cutting him off. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood turn to ice. The name displayed made her stomach drop. David Chen. "I need to take this," she said, already climbing out of bed. She went into the living room, closing the bedroom door behind her. Her hands shook as she answered. "What do you want, David?" "Hello, Emma." Her ex-husband's voice was smooth, controlled, the voice that used to make her feel cherished, but now just made her feel trapped. "I wanted to give you a heads up. I'm withdrawing my complaint with the firm, dropping the whole thing." Emma's mind reeled. The complaint. David's vindictive claim that she'd stolen client information when she left their company, a lie designed to hurt her professionally and personally. It had been hanging over her head for 8 months, preventing her from taking on certain clients, forcing her to rebuild from nothing. Why? She managed to keep her voice steady. "Let's just say I got what I needed." There was satisfaction in his voice, cruel and familiar. "I know you didn't take anything, Emma. I always knew. I just wanted you to understand that you can't just walk away from me without consequences. But now that you've learned your lesson—" "You're a bastard," Emma whispered. "Maybe, but I'm a bastard who's leaving you alone now." The investigator gave me his final report. "You've been a good girl, Emma. Living quietly, not causing any trouble. You've suffered enough." The line went dead. Emma stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. Investigator? David had hired someone to investigate her, to follow her, watch her, report on her life. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. She turned to find James standing in the bedroom doorway, fully dressed. His face was pale, his expression devastated. "Emma, get out!" Her voice was surprisingly calm. "Please, let me explain. You were the investigator." "It wasn't a question. David hired you to spy on me." James took a step toward her, hands raised. "Yes." "But Emma, please listen. How long?" Her voice cracked. "How long have you been reporting back to him about me? I'm not anymore. I haven't been for weeks. Emma, I fell in love with you. Stop." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the morning sun. "Just stop. Was any of it real? The coffee? The movies? Last night? All of it? Everything?" James's voice was raw. "Emma, I know what this looks like, but I swear, you know what I find interesting." Emma's laugh was bitter. "I never told you David's last name. I never told you where I worked. But somehow you showed up in the apartment next door right when Mrs. Kowalski conveniently moved out. How much did David pay you to arrange that?" James flinched. "Emma, get out." This time her voice rose. "Get out of my apartment. Get out of my life. Please just give me 5 minutes to explain. You had months to tell me the truth. Months when we were becoming friends, when I was starting to trust you, when I—" She cut herself off, furious at the tears threatening to fall. "Every conversation we had, every secret I shared with you, you were taking notes to report back to my abusive ex-husband. You helped him terrorize me." "No," James's voice broke. "Emma, I stopped reporting to him after the 3rd week. I couldn't do it anymore. What I felt for you, what I feel for you, it's real. I know I should have told you then, should have confessed everything, but I was terrified of losing you. You never had me. You had a target, an assignment. That's not true. You need to leave. Now. Or I'm calling the police." James stared at her for a long moment, his face a portrait of misery. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay. I'll go. But Emma, please know that I love you. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. And I'm so sorry." Emma turned her back on him, staring out the window at the grey Portland sky. She heard his footsteps cross to the door, heard it open. "I'll be next door," he said quietly. "When you're ready to hear the whole story, if you're ever ready, I'll be there." The door closed. Emma stood alone in her apartment, in the life she'd so carefully rebuilt, and felt it all crumbling around her again. The next 3 days were agony. Emma heard James moving around next door, heard his door open and close, heard his footsteps in the hallway. Twice he knocked on her door. The first time she ignored it. The second time she yelled through the door that she'd call the police if he didn't leave her alone. She couldn't eat, couldn't work, could barely sleep. She kept replaying every moment they'd shared, trying to separate truth from deception. Had he really been interested in her stories about Portland, or had he just been gathering information? When he laughed at her jokes, was it genuine or calculated? When he kissed her, when he held her, when he looked at her with such tenderness, had any of it been real? The worst part was that she'd felt something shift between them last night, something profound. She'd felt safe enough to be vulnerable, to let someone see the parts of herself she'd kept hidden. And it had all been built on lies. On the 4th day, there was an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a letter, several pages long, handwritten on plain paper. "Emma, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to ask for your time or attention, but I need you to know the truth, all of it, and then I'll leave you alone if that's what you want. Your ex-husband contacted my firm in July. He claimed you'd stolen proprietary information, and he needed evidence to support his legal case. The job was supposed to be simple: move into your building, establish casual contact, determine if you were engaging in any corporate espionage or passing information to competitors. I was good at my job. I'd done similar work dozens of times. I knew how to build rapport, gain trust, gather information. I told myself I was just doing surveillance, that the job was ethically sound because your ex claimed he was protecting his company. Then I met you. Emma, I knew something was wrong by the end of our first coffee. You weren't some corporate spy. You were just you. Funny and guarded and clearly carrying some old hurt you were trying to heal from. I could see the way you'd flinch at sudden noises, the way you kept your back to walls in cafes, the way you'd sometimes drift away mid-conversation like you were somewhere else entirely. I started digging into David Chen. What I found made me sick. The complaints from your former colleagues about his controlling behavior, the HR reports that went nowhere because he was a partner, the restraining order request you'd filed and then withdrawn, the pattern of psychological abuse that everyone seemed to know about, but nobody stopped. I realized he hadn't hired me to investigate corporate theft. He'd hired me to terrorize you, to make sure you knew you were being watched, that you could never fully escape him. That was when I stopped reporting to him. I should have told you then. I should have knocked on your door and confessed everything. But I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting you by staying close, that if David hired someone else they might actually hurt you, whereas I would never let that happen. I told myself a lot of things to justify my deception. The truth is, I was falling in love with you. And I was terrified that if you knew what I'd done, I'd lose you before we'd even had a chance to begin. I know that makes it worse, not better. I know I should have put your agency and right to choose above my own feelings. I failed you in the most fundamental way. For what it's worth, and I know it's not worth much, here's what I did do. I told David you were living a completely quiet life. No corporate espionage, no revenge plots, no scandal. Just a woman trying to rebuild in peace. I told him 3 weeks ago that I was done with the investigation and closing the case. He paid me. I submitted my final report, which contained nothing he could use against you, and I considered the matter finished. I didn't know he would call you. I didn't know he'd been using my reports to twist the knife to make sure you knew you were being monitored. If I had known, I don't know what I would have done. That's the problem. I was so busy falling in love with you that I stopped thinking clearly about what my presence in your life meant. You asked if any of it was real. Emma, all of it was real. Every conversation, every laugh, every moment we shared, that was the most real thing in my life. Falling in love with you was the least calculated thing I've ever done. It ambushed me completely, but I understand if you can't believe that. I understand if you never want to see me again. I've already contacted my landlord about breaking my lease. I'll be out of the building by the end of next week. I just wanted you to know you deserve so much better than what I did to you. You deserve honesty and respect, and someone who sees how extraordinary you are. You deserve to feel safe. And I'm sorry, so desperately sorry that I made you feel otherwise. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. And if you don't, I'll respect that too. Whatever you decide, please know that knowing you, even briefly, changed my life. You made me want to be better than I was. I hope someday I will be. With love and profound regret, Emma read the letter 3 times. Then she sat on her couch and cried. For herself, for the trust that had been broken, for the connection she'd felt and lost. She cried for the loneliness that had driven her to open her door to a stranger, and for the cruelty of finding out that stranger had been sent by the one person she'd tried so hard to escape. But she also cried because she believed him. Despite everything, she believed that his feelings had been real. It was Saturday morning when Emma finally knocked on James's door. She'd been awake all night thinking. She heard movement inside, then the door opened. James looked terrible. Unshaven, red-eyed, wearing the same clothes she'd seen him in yesterday. When he saw her, something like hope flickered across his face before he shut it down. "Emma, can we talk?" He stepped back immediately. "Of course. Come in." His apartment was full of packed boxes. He'd clearly meant what he said about leaving. They sat in his living room, a careful distance between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I believe you," Emma finally said, "that you fell in love with me. That you stopped reporting to David." James exhaled shakily. "Thank you, but I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can trust you again." Emma's voice wavered. "You let me fall for you knowing you'd lied to me from the very beginning. That's not something I can just get over." "I know," James's hands were clasped tightly in his lap. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know the truth. Here's what I need to know, Emma said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. When you held me last week after I told you about my panic attacks, was that real, or was that you gathering information? That was real, James's voice cracked. Emma, that was the moment I knew I was completely gone for you. When you trusted me with that, when you let me see your fear, I wanted to protect you from everything, including myself. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I'm a coward. And because, he stopped, swallowing hard, because I knew that once you found out you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me right now, like I'm dangerous, like I'm just another person who hurt you. You are another person who hurt me, Emma said quietly. I know. James stood abruptly, pacing to the window. I know, and I hate myself for it. Emma, I've spent my entire career invading people's privacy in the name of security and justice. I've always told myself I was one of the good guys, that what I did was necessary. But this, what I did to you, showed me what I really am. I'm just another person who uses people and calls it work. So, what are you going to do about it? He turned to look at her, confusion crossing his face. What? You said knowing me made you want to be better. Emma stood too, her heart pounding. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to keep running investigations like this one? Keep lying to people, getting close to them under false pretenses? No, the answer was immediate. I've already submitted my resignation to the firm. I can't do this work anymore. I don't know what I'll do instead, but not this. That's a start, Emma said. They stood in silence for a moment, the winter light streaming through the windows between them. Emma, what are you saying? James asked carefully. I'm saying... She took a deep breath. I'm saying I'm angry at you, furious. What you did was unforgivable. You violated my privacy, my trust, my sense of safety. You worked for the man who made my life hell. I know. Let me finish. Emma moved closer. But I also know what it's like to make choices you regret because you're scared. I know what it's like to lie to yourself about what you're doing and why. When I stayed with David for so long, I told myself all kinds of stories to justify it. That he loved me, really. That the good times were worth the bad. That I could fix things if I just tried harder. That's different. You were being abused. It is different, Emma agreed. But it taught me something about how complicated people are. How we can do the wrong thing for complex reasons. How sometimes caring about someone makes us into our worst selves because we're so afraid of losing them. James was staring at her like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. I'm not saying I forgive you, Emma continued. I'm not sure I can. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I'm saying I understand why you did what you did. And I believe that you regret it. And I believe... Her voice caught. I believe that what we had was real, at least toward the end. It was all real, James said urgently, closing the distance between them. Emma, from that first coffee, I was just trying to get through the assignment. But by the second time we met, I was showing up because I wanted to see you. By the third, I was counting the hours until we'd be together again. Everything I felt, everything I feel, is real. Then why do I still feel like I don't really know you? James took her hands, and Emma let him, even though her instinct was to pull away. Ask me anything. No more lies, no more evasion. Shall I tell you anything you want to know? So she did. They talked for hours. Emma asked about his childhood, his past relationships, his work. James answered every question honestly, even when the answers made him look bad. He told her about the marriages he'd helped ruin through his investigations, the trust he'd violated in the name of corporate security, the ethical compromises he'd made so many times they'd stopped feeling like compromises. He told her about his own divorce 5 years ago, how his ex-wife had accused him of never really being present, always holding something back. She was right, he said. I didn't know how to be vulnerable with someone. Didn't know how to let anyone see the parts of me I didn't like. Until you. As afternoon faded into evening, Emma found some of her anger softening into something more complicated. She was still hurt, still betrayed. But she could also see the person James actually was beneath the deception, flawed and guilty, and desperately trying to make amends. "I'm moving back to Boston," James said as darkness fell. "I can't stay here. Can't be next door to you while you're trying to heal. That wouldn't be fair. When do you leave?" "My flight's on Tuesday." 3 days. Emma felt something twist in her chest. She'd been so angry, so focused on the betrayal, that she hadn't let herself think about what it would mean to never see him again. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "That night we spent together, if I hadn't kissed you, would you have told me the truth?" James met her eyes. "Yes, that's what I was trying to do before you kissed me. I couldn't keep it secret anymore. I was falling apart from the weight of it. I knew I was going to lose you either way, but at least if I told you myself, I'd have been honest in the end." Emma believed him. She could see it in his face, in the exhaustion and guilt that had carved new lines around his eyes. "I should go," she said, standing. "Let you finish packing." James walked her to the door. In the hallway, Emma turned back. "James, thank you for telling me the truth. Even if it came too late, thank you." "Emma, wait." He reached for her hand, then thought better of it. "I know I have no right to ask this, but if someday you find yourself able to forgive me, even a little, could you let me know? Not for us to be together necessarily, just so I know I didn't completely destroy the best thing that ever happened to me." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "I'll think about it." She didn't sleep that night, or the next. She kept replaying conversations, trying to map the geography of their relationship, where the lies ended and the truth began, where calculation gave way to genuine feeling. By Monday night, Emma still hadn't reached any conclusions. She only knew that the thought of James leaving felt wrong. Despite everything, the thought of never seeing him again felt like another loss in a life that had already held too many. It was nearly midnight when she found herself standing outside his door. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What was she doing? What could she possibly say? The door opened before she could decide. James stood there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking as sleepless as she felt. "I heard you in the hallway," he said quietly. "Thought you might be working up the courage to knock or working up the courage to leave. I don't know what I'm doing here." "That's okay. You don't have to know." They looked at each other across the threshold. Emma saw dark circles under James's eyes, saw the way his hands gripped the doorframe like he needed the support. "I don't want you to go," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. James's eyes closed briefly. "Emma? I know it's probably stupid. I know I should want you gone, should want to never see you again. But I don't." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I keep thinking about everything we shared, everything we could have had. And I hate that David took that from us too. I hate that he managed to ruin something good even from a distance." "This isn't about David," James said gently. "This is about me and what I did. You have every right to want me gone. I know. That's why I'm so angry at myself for wanting you to stay." Emma felt tears start to fall. "I'm angry at you, James. I'm hurt and betrayed, and I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But I also—" She couldn't finish. "You also what?" "I also love you." The words were barely a whisper. "And I hate myself for it. But I do." James made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Emma, you shouldn't—" "I know I shouldn't, but I do." She wiped at her tears impatiently. "These last few days have been horrible, but not as horrible as they should have been, because the worst part wasn't the betrayal. The worst part was thinking I'd never see you again. That I'd never hear your laugh or watch you make that concentrated face when you're reading or wake up in your arms." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know if I can forgive you. I'm saying I don't know if we can ever have what we almost had. But I'm saying maybe we could try. Maybe we could start over, this time with complete honesty. This time with you being who you actually are, and me deciding if I can love that person. You'd be willing to do that? After everything?" Emma thought about it. Thought about the life she'd built after leaving David. Small and safe and lonely. Thought about the person she'd been becoming with James. Braver, more open, more herself. Thought about the risk of trusting again versus the certainty of being alone. "I'm willing to try," she said finally. "If you are. If you're really done with that work. If you're really committed to being honest with me from now on. No more secrets, no more evasion, just the truth even when it's hard." "Especially when it's hard," James agreed. "Emma, I swear to you—" "Don't swear anything yet," Emma interrupted. "Just promise me that if I decide I can't do this, if I wake up one day and realize I can't get past what you did, you'll let me go. No fighting, no manipulating, no trying to convince me. You'll respect my choice. I promise." James's voice was thick with emotion. "Emma, I'll spend the rest of my life earning back your trust if you'll let me. I'll be so transparent it'll be annoying. I'll answer every question, explain every absence, prove every single day that I'm choosing you and choosing honesty." "Then cancel your flight," Emma said, "and let's see if we can figure this out." James stepped into the hallway, and for a moment they just looked at each other, two damaged people trying to build something real from the ruins of deception. "Can I hug you?" James asked quietly. "Or is that too much too soon?" Emma considered. Her head said it was too much, but her heart ached for the comfort of his arms. "You can hug me," she said finally. He pulled her close, and Emma let herself sink into his warmth. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the betrayal or magically restore her trust, but it felt like a beginning, tentative and fragile and real. "Thank you," James whispered into her hair. "Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve." "Don't make me regret it," Emma said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I won't. I swear I won't." They stood in the hallway for a long time, holding each other in the space between their two apartments, between the past and whatever future they might build together. 6 months later, Emma woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of James moving around her, their kitchen. They'd officially moved in together last month, combining their apartments into one larger space. It had felt like a big step, but also inevitable. The months since that night in the hallway hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, moments when Emma's trust would crack and James would have to prove himself all over again. There had been arguments, tears, difficult conversations about boundaries and transparency and what they both needed to feel safe. James had quit his security firm and started working as a cybersecurity consultant, helping companies protect their data without the surveillance and deception. He'd started therapy to work through his own issues with vulnerability and connection. He'd introduced Emma to his family, shown her the messy, complicated truth of his life without trying to manage her impression of it. And slowly, painfully, Emma had started to trust again. Not blindly. She doubted she'd ever trust anyone blindly again. But carefully, with her eyes open, she'd let herself believe that people could change, that mistakes could be learned from, that love could survive betrayal if both people were willing to do the work. "Morning," James said, appearing in the bedroom doorway with 2 mugs of coffee. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in years," Emma admitted. It was true. The nightmares about David had finally started to fade, replaced by dreams of the future she and James were building together. James sat on the edge of the bed, handing her a mug. "So, I wanted to talk to you about something." Emma felt a flutter of anxiety, old patterns dying hard. "Okay. Nothing bad, I promise." He took her free hand. "I got a call from a law firm yesterday. They're representing several women who are building a case against David for workplace abuse and harassment. They wanted to know if you'd be willing to give a statement about your experiences." Emma's heart started to pound. "I don't know if I—" "You don't have to," James said quickly. "This is entirely your choice. But Emma, there are 5 other women ready to go public. With your testimony, they'd have a much stronger case. You could help stop him from doing to other people what he did to us." "To us?" "He used me to hurt you," James said. "That makes me complicit in his abuse." "I've been thinking a lot about that, about how men like David weaponize other men, get us to do their dirty work without even fully realizing what we're participating in." He squeezed her hand. "I can't undo what I did, but maybe we could both testify. Maybe we could help make sure he can't hurt anyone else." Emma thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, terrified and isolated and convinced she had to handle everything alone. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, so afraid of being hurt again, that she'd almost pushed away the best thing in her life. She thought about the woman she was becoming, stronger, braver, not because she'd stopped being afraid, but because she'd learned that fear didn't have to control her. "Okay," she said, "I'll do it. We'll do it together." James's face lit up with pride and love. "You're amazing. You know that?" "I'm learning," Emma said, pulling him down for a kiss. "We both are." Outside, Portland was waking up to a spring morning, cherry blossoms drifting past the window, light streaming through the glass. Inside, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of ways sat together in the quiet, drinking coffee and planning their testimony, planning their future, planning the life they would build on a foundation of hard-won honesty and trust. It wasn't the love story Emma had imagined for herself. It was messier, more complicated, born from deception and betrayal and the painful work of forgiveness. But it was real. And for Emma Chen, who'd spent so long just trying to survive, real was more than enough. It was everything. If you made it this far, don't forget to leave your comment, your like, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.